Hello, everyone. Back with Timothy Smith. My name's Louis Damiani. We're interviewing Tim, the main archivist, on the PB archives housed at Cornell Library System in Kroc Library itself. We're very happy to have Tim to help us explore and explain, because some people find it difficult to navigate uh, these PB archives. We're talking about them online, and we're going to explore a different section of them today with Tim. So, welcome back.
Yes, indeed. And feel free to ask questions. Um, we'll try to answer them if we can, and if we can't, we'll make something up. No, we won't.
No,
Uh,
we won't, but I, all
there's
right.
an
So,
infinite amount of, yeah.
there's so much in the archive, Tim. Um, and we've gone over the writings, which are to me one of the crown jewels. Uh, but the other sections, look forward to exploring them with you. You put so much time and energy with yourself and others, the people you were working with, to put this archive together. There is such a wealth of information and history here. But today we're going to take a little time and explore the section, and I will bring it up. We'll share screen. We'll go back and forth because it just gets boring looking at just one thing. So right now we will share our screen, and we are going to share the archives of Paul Brunton. So www.pbarchives.org. And as I said, we explored the writing, and now we're on this section called biographical and secondary materials. Do you want me to go ahead and open that, Tim?
No,
No?
I'm going to talk about the photograph just like I did for the first one, and then we can do the open it up. So
All
just
right.
to take in that this photograph, there are a lot of photographs, and we'll get to looking at them at some point in this process. This one here and those of its that are quite similar were taken probably by a woman named Sharira or Sherry Wesselman, who was a friend of PB's wife, Evangeline Glass. Um, and we're taking probably um, the majority. It's somewhere in near New York City. Uh, the Wesselmans had a penthouse in New York City, and when PB was passing through New York, he would the Wesselmans were one of the of his students that he would visit. Another one being Anthony Damiani, Lewis's father and father, for that matter. Um, and later on, his own son was stayed in New York City. Uh, but this is
Kenneth.
probably. Go ahead.
Kenneth, his
Yeah,
son,
Kenneth.
PB's son. Yeah.
Yeah, Kenneth's son. Right. Yeah, Kenneth Hurst. Um, Okay, so yeah, that's just a little note there. We can go into the biographical section there. Um, and yeah, uh, working from the bottom up here because I think in terms of prioritizing one's time, the thing called publication materials is basically a careful documentation of PB's, the history of his publication of his books, various copyright agreements and so forth. Um, and since he kept them in order, through the end of his life, we included them here, though, they have a little bit of interest in them in that they show a better timing for when he actually completed his books because these are the dates of the copyright rather than the printed, when the books came into print, which was sometimes many months later on. Um, the printed articles and newspaper clippings, if it shows a couple of things. One is that PB was actively aware and reactively engaged with um, the current events, um, and would make annotations, um, on various articles that came out of newspapers or magazines, as he sort of considered their unfoldment
Mm.
of various um, shifts and manifestations of different ideologies and so forth that were being sort of shown through history. Um, when I was with him, he read.
Hold on one second. I need to. Sorry, folks. There was a little glitch in my home system, um, so please excuse that. We're back here. We are
Yeah.
okay.
So, in their printed articles and newspaper clippings, it, as I said, PB made notes. One of the things that he was concerned with during the post-war years after 1945 or whatever, was World War III. After the nuclear event end of the two bombs in Japan left quite a number of human beings, mostly anybody that had any kind of exposure to current events, pretty worried about a nuclear war. And PB, well, paid attention to the ebb and flow of the Cold War between Russia and Western powers, as well as other things that were going on. One of the things that I think um, I came to understand that PB had a lot to do with, um, during but from the 1930s up until the 1960s or so forth, was the kind of transition of nobility in the West and even and also in the East, from their positions of political power to being sort of cultural stewards. So he worked with the Maharaja Maharanis, which is a king and queen of Mysore, who was actually the Maharaja of Mysore was a very close friend of his and also considered a saint in India. He also worked with the family of the Greek royalty, the Spanish royalty, Dutch royalty, um, in the years immediately following the Second World War, and sort of had conversations or counselings with some of these individuals. And we know this from conversations he himself had from time to time about these individuals, and also through his correspondence. And sometimes with the annotations he would make on newspaper clippings about these families changing from being the monarch of Greece to a monarch in exile, who had no political power, but still had a cultural relevance at the time. Um,
Mm.
so before World War One, Europe was basically a highly stratified society where you had not just the royal families, but an aristocracy,
An
which was
aristocracy. Yeah.
which was entirely hereditary.
Hmm.
Um, and then the two world wars wiped that out because Uh, the bombs didn't care, what your heritage was. They fell on everybody equally, and people began to notice that, um, and the ability of the aristocracy to maintain their extravagant lifestyle compared to that of the average person really collapsed. It's really shocking. I mean, so this is the kind of thing we don't really think about at this point in time because it's from an age that's so far so far past, what's going on now. But one of the examples that really always struck me was that the average pay of a skilled um, craftsperson in 1930 was about 150 pounds a year.
Hmm.
The cost of one single night of a coming out party for a debutante was 100,000 pounds.
Hmm.
So that's 10,000 workers worth of a light for one damn night of,
Yeah.
champagne and ballroom lights and band and whatnot. So I mean, so there's no middle class at that time, really. There's just and so one of the things that the Second World War did was it brought about a middle class, and that then had this effect of, you know, um, dislocating the upper class. But these upper class people still had, different kinds of power and authority because they'd had the time to study and become polylinguistic or read philosophy or learn how to paint and whatnot, where, many millions of people at a much lower level simply, had
Yeah.
no more
Yeah.
time. So Peavy, focused during that post-war period, particularly on trying to encourage these former aristocrats to consider their, to apply themselves to philosophy, spirituality, and to good works and so forth, rather than to, spending their last years in sort of, you trying to maintain what had been the lifestyle that had existed before the wars.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
So
yeah.
And I think that's important because we have all this. If you look at the PB writings in themselves, it would seem as though that was that the man spent his entire life with a pen in his hand, and like Karl Marx. Karl Marx, wrote his entire works in the sitting room of the um, National Library in London, you know, and was not a person who actually saw what the workers' lives were really like. He just theorized what they would probably like, um, and that disconnect led to a core flaw in communism, which was that the people at the bottom have no interest in sharing any more than the people at the top. They just want to be the people at the top. It's like,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
so um, the human nature is sort of pervasive regardless of our economic strata. Anyway, so PB didn't just write these books. He explored sacred spots. He interviewed hundreds, thousands of individuals, practitioners, and seekers of many levels of development, many levels of self knowledge or self delusion, and he also was part of what they called the Great Game, the politics of of Europe during up until about the 1960s when he basically withdrew from
Public. Yeah.
so that's
I'll
what all
share
that stuff.
again here.
Yes, sir. So
So,
Pierre, the
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So peers and acquaintances would be just what they say they are. I mean, they're if we open that up, so you can sort of see, okay, Ananda Matea. Ananda Matea was his one of his teachers. Um, it was also that was he was known as Alan Bennett in the first part of his life. Alan Bennett and lived with a perhaps more notorious individual by the name of Aleister Crowley. Uh,
Interesting.
and Alan
Very
Bennett,
interesting biography of Alan Bennett or Ananda Matea. It's such an interesting man.
he's a very interesting man, and his writings on Buddhism um, have some really, really amazingly
Yeah,
mature
yeah.
considerations.
Now he was in the Southern School of Buddhism, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
he
yeah.
was a
No,
Hinayana.
this section on Ananda Matea is I invite the viewer to visit it because truly an amazing man, and his writings on Buddhism really are just profound and very moving, very moving. You know, uh,
Yeah,
really worth the
and
read.
you definitely want to be alert. Some of these sections are more entertaining, but others that what another Matei has to say requires some careful, conscious attention. Um, and yeah, time well spent. Going down there, as you can see, Greek royalty. As I mentioned, he was a friend and advisor to the Greek royal family. This was publicly known at the time. It's there are newspaper clips from Greece acknowledging that. Um, and so the Greek royalty materials are sort of indicate more of his association with. So the difference between clips and materials is clips is like newspaper
I
and
see.
magazine, where materials are things that were notes or correspondence between himself and these Greek royals, or as it says here, an essay written by Queen Frederica on philosophy. There are several
Well,
members of this family that went on to study with Sri Shankaracharya that PB himself had interviewed in 1934, and they were
now there's some pictures too of them with Mahadevan. Is that true in
yes,
the photo library?
yes.
Yeah, yeah.
I was about to say that while they were devotees of Shankaracharya, they were actually sort of direct students of T.M.P. Mahadevan, who himself was the secretary or sort of spokesperson for His Holiness Shankaracharya. So they had a lot of involvement with that. Um, in Insight School of Yoga is a person who took some of PB's ideas and created a kind of a study program on yoga
Excuse me.
that's it's yeah, it's interesting as a kind of an accessible point of entry into both yoga, the ideas of yoga, and also some of PB's own uh, contributions to meditation and so forth.
Mm.
Um, you have down here legends and frescoes about Athos. He spent again. I mean, he was in Greece, so of course he was going to encounter um, the monks of Mount Athos, who are one of the more enduring and remarkable monastic traditions. Then you can scroll down a little bit more there.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I would remind the viewer too that there's some beautiful quotes of PB's in the notebooks on his visit to Mount Athos and his visit with the monks. Really beautiful.
so now we have three things by Martinus. Martinus, a book by him. Now, Martinus, is there was a reader's question about Martinus that came up and somehow and about how why did Peavy spend so much time with him and so forth, as I recall.
Yeah.
And a couple of things to keep in mind that you would sort of have to like read into Peavy's whole life to kind of take in some of this stuff. Um, Peavy's first wife, Karen Tottrop, who was the mother of his son, Kenneth Hurst, um, was Danish.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she never, I don't know if she ever got her British citizenship. She was, she had a Danish passport most of her life. Um, and um, PB visited her family um, in Denmark whenever he was passing through Denmark, long after he and Karen had separated. So he looked in on her parents, on his parent, mother and father-in-law, as it were. Um, and so he had reason to spend time in Denmark for that reason. Um, it also was a time when he and Evangeline Glass were sort of adjusting to being married, and they both stayed. She was in the midst of she was an opera soprano, and she had a contract to do a number of tours with opera companies across Europe, and PB had a speaking engagement, so they were not always able to be in the same place at the same time, and they accepted Martinus's hospitality to sort of use him as a home base. So they both would kind of come and go for a few months as their schedules, were out of sync, you know. So there were periods of time when Evangeline was with Martinus's community by herself, and sometimes with PB, and sometimes he was there by himself, and so forth, as they were sort of sorting out their European schedules.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I should mention something about Martinus's community as well as himself. He had a brilliant idea when it came to creating a study center or a spiritual center. He put it on the coast of Denmark, where the family members, the people who would come and want to study with his particular take on cosmic knowledge. Um, sometimes these individuals would, want to spend a few weeks with him, but their kids or their spouse or whatever wouldn't necessarily be excited to be sitting in a lecture hall on these topics. So Martinus created this community where there was basically a seaside spa as well as a study center. So there were canoes, there were badminton places, they were literally had access to the ocean. So it was a very relaxed and a community that included sort of support of the family members and their sort of so that the people studying with him were not separated from their family while they were engaged in studying with him.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and he was one of these independent thinkers which pop up from time to time, like Goethe or Rudolf Steiner and so forth. And these individuals are as PB said to my wife at one time, do they all have to be 100% sages for them to be smarter than you and worth studying? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so Martinus wouldn't necessarily be ranked as at the same level as you will of Ramana Maharshi or Shankaracharya or His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who are individuals that embraced transcendental states that were contentless and impersonal, as well as states that were rich with complex vision of the cosmos. So, as apprehending as a way of being brought into contact with cosmic consciousness, Martinus certainly has a gift to be shared and to be taken in. Um, and It's a rare person who can successfully skip over that kind of study and study only the most abstract and impersonal doctrines without um, eventually being pulled back down and having to learn these other things.
Well, I
Uh,
look forward to reading them. I have not read these sections on Martinus. I look forward to reading them.
Yeah,
And
he has
I,
some his diagrams are like Steiner's. He's got some really beautiful, he like, Anthony and Steiner and Goethe had like this way of sort of drawing pictures of the cosmos and making maps. Also, Robert Flood did the same thing. And all of these maps are helpful because they organize, they allow us to look at many levels at once rather than sort of in a linear way, which you get when you're looking at a text. When you read a text,
mhm,
it has to, it employ it enforces a kind of sequentiality, whereas when you look at a diagram, it allows a certain kind of simultaneity. And his
mm,
diagrams are, mandalas. I mean, they invoke uh, could be very useful for meditations.
interesting.
Going
I look forward to exploring them, Tim. Well,
going on down here. Yeah. So by the way, yes, I didn't put anything in the archive I didn't read. So yeah.
that's quite a statement because this is a large archive.
Yeah. It took me. Well, I started looking at this. I won't say, but about 45 years ago. So um, Memories of Dr. Paul Brunton by Mila Kapkova. One of the more amazing groups that formed to study Paul Brunton's writings was in Czechoslovakia, um, and there were two. There was a fragmentation within that group, as happens pretty commonly in in any kind of religious or philosophic group. There's differences of opinion hit some point of irreconcilability, but the their engagement with PB and he met with these individuals for about a year prior to the invasion, the Hitler, the Nazi overthrow of the Czech government, um, and his letters and instructions to these individuals about how to kind of cope with that insurrection, with that might in fact people might find that rather applicable to some things that are going on today.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
and he had an uncanny. I mean, there's some things in there that are really kind of uncanny. When uh, you know, about 3 days before the communists invaded Czechoslovakia, after the Second World War, they received a long letter from PB warning them about this, and again giving them a series of recommendations on how to engage with the communist takeover. The interesting thing about this letter was he sent it from India, and he had written it like 5 weeks prior.
mm.
But he wrote it in such a time. He wrote it. He had this. I don't know how to describe it other than saying an uncanny or innate sense of timing, where he would write things that would arrive sort of just exactly when they were needed. You know, um, and it's just a why he would sort of pick up and decide to write this letter on this day. That because if he had written it a week later, they never would have gotten it
Right,
because the communists would have stopped it from even happening.
right.
Um, so we have some other books here. The Shadow of Atlantis. PB
And what
was
about
quite
the Ramana Maharshi materials?
yeah. Sorry. The uh,
a number of handwritten and typed notes about Ramana and his
Yeah,
teachings.
I know. Besides,
Ramana is very big today. There's so many people influenced by his teachings, and the fact that PB had so much influence of bringing Ramana to public view in India and abroad, and that there's so much in the archive on Ramana. For that reason alone, many people might be interested in these archives.
yes, that's a good point. These that well, this Ramana Maharshi material is sort of a very small subset of Peavy's interactions with Ramana, his thoughts about Ramana's teachings, which permeate pretty much all of his writings, and also the notebooks as well. Um, he these are some. I sighed when I saw it because um, the handwritten material, some of it is in Tamil, which is the language of the Ramana spoke, and is not one of the more easy languages to learn. So it's never some of this stuff has never been translated because never found anybody who could translate it. Um, but we kept it anyway. There's some other things which are written in English, either by Romana himself or by one of his secretaries at the time. Um, when PB first came to India, at kind of the behest of Mayor Baba, um, and he spent Mayor Baba was in looking for someone to be his publicist, basically, uh, in English, because he wanted to, have a big following, basically.
Mhm.
And so he invited PB, and I think it probably funded PB to some degree. Though that's a speculation. I don't really know. I mean, I do know from looking at the costs of things that that to get to India when PB first went um, cost about 1 year's salary for an average working person.
Mm.
So it was 100 pounds or so, and it took several months. You were on board.
And PB
You
was an average working guy.
yeah.
Didn't have he did not come from money.
He did not. His father was a shoemaker, and he at that time was a journalist, writing for Occult Review and for various other magazines. Some topics, or he like wrote a beautiful article on Angkor Wat, for example. Or he wrote a book. He wrote a tour of the secrets of London. That's actually in the Occult Review. So he
Oh,
wrote, so he wrote a lot of different things. He made a living writing articles and so forth. He was in his
he was a working man. Because that was a
definitely.
question on our YouTube site. Uh, be, could how did PB afford to travel the way he
Well,
did? You're
yeah.
explaining it a little bit, and that's really good.
So he got probably some subsidy either from the mysterious yogi that he met at J.M. Watkins, that he mentions in Search and Secret India, or from the Meher Baba people. He did stay quite a long time. He was only in India for 5.5, 6 months on his first visit. And it's out of that short time that his book, Search and Secret India, was born. At least 3 of those months were spent more or less in, okay, so I can do this correctly. About 2.5 months he was actually in the Meher Baba Center on the west coast of um, India, and then he was sent to Madras, now Chennai, by Meher Baba, who was in search of wealthy patrons, preferably American or British, that he wanted PB to to hustle up some donors and so forth, and he did. He found a couple of people who became lifetime supporters of Mayor Baba. They were Americans who happened to be in Chennai at the time, but he also encountered um, this man Bud Fletcher, and he through that conversation and with his young yogi that had met him all the way back when he first got off the boat and said, you must follow my master. And BB's like, yeah, great. I hear that, 3 times a day. So, you know, he re-encountered this man, and by then he was not so comfortable with Mayor Baba's, um, say, being sort of a rational presentation of Hinduism.
Mhm.
Um, and he was starting to look around, and they decided to go down, and he met Ramana Maharshi, and basically with that he's like, oh, now I know why I'm in India, you know,
Wow.
and there was no, I mean, there's no sort of hesitation. It was like, um, as Ramana said later, when heart speaks to heart, there's
Yeah.
no need for words, and
It's a
they
beautiful
created
quote. Yeah.
a bond which persisted and throughout their lives. And PB spent some weeks with Ramana Maharshi until basically the climate got to him, and he left. I think 2 weeks early because summer was killing him. So he
Yeah.
went back to India, England. But he continued to relate to the Ramana ashram in spite of the fact that Ramana's brother became a quite problematic individual in those early years, which was not simply focused on PB, but on all Westerners, um, who he really wanted to enforce that they had, they subsidized Romana exclusively. Um, so there's some good and
Yeah.
bad things going on there, but
Yeah.
PB um, reverence for Romana was persisted throughout his life. I mean, he had a photograph of Romana in his living room, and he felt, that his teachings were sort of um, seminal to BB's own spiritual journey for sure.
Yeah.
And
It's
so,
beautiful within this how much material of Ramana is in the archive. But I'll go back um, and have you point out
yeah,
more wonderful stuff here.
we go down on through there. So yeah, the Ramana stuff is so. I mean, the only thing I'm saying about the Ramana Maharshi materials is that if you're really interested in PB's views on Ramana and so forth, you have to use a search engine because there's a lot more material in PB's own writings where he's
Yeah.
talking about Ramana and Ramana's ideas. This is really sort of a purely biographical sort of niche of the stuff that wasn't, say, philosophical, the ideas, but some more like sort of their like the newspaper clippings about Romana's life and when he died and so forth. Um, Shadows of Atlantis. Well, the PB included several things in his library that we might find hard to understand if we're sort of inclined towards a metaphysical purist approach to philosophy. PB had no doubt that it had been a place of cultural and spiritual development, and that when it self-destructed, it scattered its remnants across Central America, um, a bit of South America, and also Egypt, and
Yeah.
even all the way to Japan. Basically, anywhere there's pyramids is an echo of Atlantis.
Yeah.
He spoke to me about it a few times. Michael Just is one of PB's friends. Um, And the White Brother is a story that was sort of based upon um, PB himself in his early years as he was exploring Eastern thought and also theosophy and the occultism of the pre-war or interwar London, um, and it's an interesting read. Um, it you know I think is important to um, look at other books or other material from that time to sort of appreciate just how pervasive the interest in uh, mesmerism and seances were. That the only thing I could really compare it to is the kind of modern resurgence of interest in, microdosing of LSD or, the drug culture of today, where people still sort of chew on that as being something that might have some kind of spiritual or medical or psychological values. And, it's that's something that, you know, um, many people are conversant with, just sort of as part of the background of life. I mean, as we will see from the next group, the Zoma Charlo Diaries, um, the quick story from me. So in the PB, no, writings of PB, there is a uh, long, rather saccharine poem. And at the bottom, there's this telling note. It says, PB, I think that this is from that your friend Zoma might really like this. You know, all good wishes, signed Gertrude Stein.
Hmm. Hmm.
So in one swoop, we find out a whole bunch of stuff, right? Suddenly we have this person named Zoma. Who the hell is she? And then we have Gertrude Stein being in correspondence with PB, and being sort of having ideas about what might be interesting to him. Um, we don't really have a lot of other stuff, but of their interaction. But PB was really he didn't exist in a vacuum. He knew and discussed matters with people like Gertrude Stein, Henry Miller.
Hmm.
Uh, Henry Miller was one of the he he once told me, he said Henry Miller is the best American author. His style is like none other. Now, if you've ever read Henry Miller, you know he's rather raunchy, to say the least.
Yeah, yeah.
And I looked at PB. He said, "Well, the content may distract you, but the style is amazing."
Hmm.
um,
He
and then,
really studied the art of writing, PB. He
yes,
really studied that.
and as it happens, that Miller actually wrote a commentary on the hidden teaching and the wisdom.
Did he?
Yep. And also on Blavatsky, Secret Doctrine.
Interesting. I did not know that.
So he was, PB said, his alcoholism blocked him from, really evolving into it properly. So being able to pursue his spiritual sensitivities to their logical conclusion, if you will. But he did have them. He was a complex individual. Okay, Zoma. So I saw this word, so I Googled the word. I found that there was a woman named Zoma Charlo, um, and that she was married to a man named Jean Charlot, who was a well-known muralist and had there's a wing of Jean Charlot's paintings at the University of Hawaii's library. So I called him up and said, I spoke to this person and I said, any chance that anything in of Zoma Charlot is connected to a man named Paul Brunton? And the person I spoke to said, well, actually, I am her son, John Charlo, and yes, she was he was his typist for 4 years. from 1934 to 1938. And would you like her diaries? And I'm like, well, yes, yes, I would. So, um,
Wow.
um,
What a find. Just you turn over one little avenue and boom, amazing.
he taught me. I saw a name. I didn't know where. I Googled it. I followed it up. I kept poking until it turned into something alive. And PB, you know, PB was like that. I mean, we one time we were stuck at a railway station because the train was very delayed, and we were sitting in this railway station, and PB said, "Go ask the person." There was a thing called the Horn and Heart. It's like little like a there's a tiny little like diner where they had like fish and chips and tea. And PB said, "Go ask him if there's any other place a person could eat, especially someone who is a vegetarian." And I thought, well, right, this guy is going to be like well informed about the culinary and opportunities for vegetarians in this area because he's you know. But like, all right, PB asked me to go ask this guy. So I went up and asked him. He said, "Oh well, really, there isn't anything other than, of course, the Vegetarian Society's weekly meeting, which is happening right now upstairs." Um, which was a meal. I mean, we went upstairs and we had a vegetarian meal with the Vegetarian Society of Lausanne. You know, and,
Oh my goodness. My
you know,
goodness.
and it's like if I hadn't asked,
Yeah, yeah.
PB would ask these questions. He was like, "Don't freak out." We're on a city bus in Lausanne, also, and they had just completed the construction of a new crematorium in Lausanne, and PB wanted to see it. So he said to me, "Go ask the bus driver if he can take us there." I'm like, this is a regular scheduled bus. It's got a regular route. It's a full bus. It's not like we're the only four people on the bus or whatever. Like this bus driver is gonna like, give me the hairy eyeball for, trying to like tell him where to go or whatever. And but I went up and I said, "Oh, this gentleman back here was interested in seeing this, and would you mind?" And he said, "Oh, it would only be a block out of my way." And he turned the thing and dropped us off. And
That's what a developed intuitive faculty,
but
or
also,
so many explanations, but yeah.
but one of them, the one that I got, and why I mentioned it here is that why it sort of rubbed off a little bit on me is that PB asked questions all the time, and
Uh-huh.
when he found himself in a cul-de-sac, he would he would assume that with inquiry and intuition there's a pathway forward, as it were, um,
Interesting.
and to not be allow himself to become shackled to the assumptions of social convention. Like we would go into a restaurant. We went to a restaurant one day in Lausanne. It was very hot. Um, and PB said to me, "Could you rearrange these four tables so that they're better aligned with the air conditioner and and the windows?" And I'm like, "I am not rearranging. This is a lunch hour rush, and he's going to have me pulling tables and people around." Right. I don't feel self-conscious doing this at all, right? Um, but I did it. So we come back the next week, and the owner is like, "I never thought to put the tables in that order. It's so much better. Thank you."
That's so great. That's so great. It reminds me of the uh, maybe males across the world, but the American male who won't stop to ask directions.
Yeah.
Not PB. And
Yeah.
I
He
like the
would,
way you said it, with the right line of inquiry and intuition. Um, you can find things you might not be able to. I like
yeah.
that pairing of those two terms. That was
And it
great.
really led me to this woman Zoma, and I'll tell you a little bit about Zoma. I wrote something of her in her diaries. Her diaries are infrequently mentioned PB. PB, what happened, how she came into PB's life. She was rooming, and she was in a rooming house in London, and he happened to take lodgings in the same rooming house. Um, she and her friend, who his name slips my mind at the moment, but she and her um, a fellow secretary were two women who were doing freelancing as um, taking down transcriptions of seances. So they would go to a seance and
Oh,
then they would,
wow. And
uh,
this is in the early and mid 30s?
yes.
Yes.
So, so this woman, Zomo Charlot, had come to London to sell the photographs of Edward Weston. Uh, Zoma was some kind of lady. I mean, she was very charismatic and very attractive. Um, and so she's one of Edward Weston's models. If you go look at his photographs, you'll find pictures of her in them. She then left him after a few months. She got bored and she went to Mexico, she being half Mexican and half Aztec. Um, and she hung out with Eisenstein, the Russian filmmaker, and became part of his film. The film he never finished. Um, he made a film called Potemkin and another one called I can't think of the other one. Ivan something. Um, he was a very famous Russian filmmaker in the early days of communism, where he was able to kind of project a kind of heroic vision of the Russian peasant. And at the time in the 1930s, there was a movement towards communism in Mexico, and so he went there to film that. She was there. She ended up uh, being in his film, and then she also met uh, Jean Charlot, with whom she eventually married. Um, but she then was commissioned by Edward Weston to take his photographs to London to sell. She got to London, they didn't sell, so she was stuck in London. She didn't have money to come home. She ended up taking these commissions to transcribe these seances, and also she posed for a whole lot of people. There are
Mm,
portraits
mm.
of her by a guy named Augustus John.
Wow.
Augustus,
Well,
if you look in the National Art Gallery, Portrait Gallery in London, I think there are three different painters who painted her eventually. But the most famous one is Augustus John. She was really quite a charismatic, powerful young lady. And so PB had, saw that she was also, she was like, it would choose whether she would have tea or toast, for supper. You know,
mm.
she was really, really strapped. So PB hired her to type his books. So most of the books, the first three books, Search and Secret Egypt, Secret Path, and Search and Secret India, were typed by her. Uh,
Wow.
and so we have sort of records of when she
That
was
is
getting
so
married.
amazing. Again, I look forward to diving into that and exploring that. Such
So she,
interesting life, and I'm glad you were able to find so many of these different pieces to put into
yeah.
this archive. Really, she sounds amazing, and it's so we have a almost, I don't want to say it this way, but I'm gonna. We have almost a constipated view of spirituality. Uh, and that's not what PB's life, especially his early life. He really lived life in this big way.
Oh yes, he lived a very rich, complex bohemian existence, where he had, without a doubt, the most open mind, but not open in a passive way. it's one thing to be open-minded where somebody tells you something that you hadn't thought about
Yeah.
before, and you're like, "Oh, that sounds interesting." But he actually had an open, active mind where he would explore things that would just sort of, you had no idea where these things would come up from, but then he would just like pursue them with a thoroughness and also, um,
Yeah.
really huge respect for a lots of different kinds of people. As if a person was sincere and authentic in what they were trying to do with their lives, PB was entirely with them and engaged. If they started to try to bullshit him, he would just shut that down in a heartbeat. He's like he would
Yeah.
just he was not tolerate um, people trying to capitalize on other individuals through their gullibility, which was,
Mm.
of course, a huge. There's a terrible and chronic vein of that kind of individual around spirituality, and he would do some things. Um, he and a yogi friend of his in the 30s would go to various lectures, people giving talks on spiritual things and mesmerism, and if he saw them trying to like put post hypnotic suggestions that a woman might come to this person's dressing room, he would break the hypnotism,
Mm.
and not just for that one act, but make it so that the person was not going to be able to do much in the way would expose them basically.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he did some very forceful things that way. But to finish out here with Zoma, I mean, she
Yeah.
was
Please. Please.
um, the diary is very they are interesting in a
Do you want
sort
me
of
to go
way.
back there to the
No,
screen?
I go
Okay.
to
Okay.
no, you don't need to do that. But just the thing is, so the thing that the diaries don't tell you right away is just how remarkable and charismatic and interesting this woman was, and that she was, a dynamic human being known to many of the uh, fine artists and famous authors of her time, including her husband Jean Charlot. She was really a powerhouse of an artist. They had an amazing house in Hawaii. You can again Google it, and the Charlo House in Hawaii is a national monument. And
Oh.
it's because it's just gorgeously designed. But she and PB were close. I mean, how close you can speculate as you will, but they're close enough that Uh, when PB went to India in 1934, 35, whichever year, during that time period, we know that he went to Tibet because he wrote her that he was going to Tibet. And
Wow.
then, and he's like, sorry, I'll be out of touch for the next 4 months because I'm going to go to Tibet.
Uh,
Being in Tibet was illegal at that time.
yeah. Yeah.
This is when he was supposedly in Darigar Wall riding Hermit Himalayas, but he slipped over the border for 4 months. You
Yeah.
know, and we know it's 4 months because then he writes her coming back. Well, I'm back from Tibet. Boy, was that interesting.
Yeah. There's some of the writings there on his travels through the mountain passes and over the Himalayas into Tibet that are just amazing within the archive.
Yeah,
What he
they were.
traveled through and put up with is not for the faint of heart. It's not. It took some
No,
fortitude to travel the way he did.
yeah, it was all by
Again,
camel. It was very very high risk and very but he for a long time, it wasn't really clear to me whether he actually had gotten into Tibet or not, but he very definitely did. He got fairly far into Tibet. As to whether he got all the way to Lhasa, I don't know.
yeah,
And perhaps it's not appropriate for us to know, but he certainly did have an exposure to Tibetan Buddhism in the 1930s. It was not
yeah,
something, and I know that later on, when he was in residence in Montreux and Vevey, Switzerland, the Dalai Lama came to see him many times during those latter years in the 1970s. When
70s. Yeah, yeah.
the,
Wow, I didn't know it
but
was many times. That's interesting.
yeah,
I knew he visited him, but many times that. And the for the viewer, the PB's book, The Hermit and Himalayas, is a really wonderful read, and he makes that prediction of Tibet back then, which was so prescient in terms of, if they didn't have closed borders and they did align with some of the powers, whether it was American, British, whatever, but they were easy picking for the
yep,
Chinese.
yep,
And that is a loss for obviously them,
the
but the
world,
whole world, the whole world.
yeah.
It's such a loss. So,
Well, it's a yeah, it's a yeah. So it's true. It's a you know the negative is that that Tibet has lost its its purity and its integrity. But as the Dalai Lama said, you when you put 40,000 Chinese into Tibet, in 2 generations there'll be 40,000 more Tibetans,
yeah.
um, because the Tibetan teaching is so much more helpful to life than communist
Yeah,
dogma.
yeah,
Anyway, it's about
yeah.
time to close up for today.
Yes.
Let me just
So
wrap it
again,
up and
thank
say
you.
that, so
And
you look
and
through these things, and it shows that PB's way of being, or that his life was immersed in the expat life, the intelligentsia, the creative creators of his times, and um, there's a breadth there that is um, that it's kind of like the dream catcher, the receptacle for the depth. There's also there.
yeah,
Um,
it's
uh,
such a rare, like you're saying, breadth and depth of his life and works. And thank you for spending time going over the archives. Folks, next time we will look at the letters of PB. And until then, we wish you well. Thank you for viewing. If you like this, please subscribe to our channel and post any comments you want, and we'll get back to you. Thanks.
Thank you.